Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I deem worthy.
And I am Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I deem unworthy.
Well, I guess we'll just have to leave it up to the progenitor to make the ultimate decision.
Of course.
Welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. So this is the perfect time to start listening. Dan, I'm not used to saying this part of the script. I got to tell you, I was so used to being the 1A part of it, and now I'm back to this part. It's a little weird, but I'm going with it, all right?
Yeah, well, so now I can blame you for lying there because we haven't really put out a mainline episode of our show in some time. Although the Beyond Amazing, I think, counts as a mini
That was
season.
mainline. That was mainline.
Yeah, I think so too. But if you want to kind of tide yourself over until we start our Ron Friends Tom DeFalco season, which I imagine will start later this winter, why not check out our Amazing Spider Talk back issues feed? That's where all of our oldest episodes of the show are. If you are someone that's you know what, it's the holiday season, time to break out Superior and relive those days. Well, we got Superior Spider Talk over there, and a bunch of amazing interviews with some of our favorite creators, including Tom DeFalco and Ron Friends. You can hear some of our initial interviews with them. That's the Amazing Spider Talk back issues feed, which can be found in most places podcasts are found. So anyway, go and check that out. Mark, what are we going to be doing on this episode?
Well, today on the show, Dan and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, Number 10. This issue was written by Zeb Wells from She-Hulk fame, apparently, with art by Nick Dragotta, colors by Marcio Menyz, and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. Right? Did I finally say this right?
Yeah.
All right,
yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
This issue was first released on September 28th, 2022. And Dan, unlike the other part of the script, I'm going to keep doing summaries. Do you want to hear how I summarize this issue?
Of course I do. This is your territory now. I am ceding the ground for Mark to do the summaries.
All right. Well, before I begin, I do want to ask everyone listening at home, let's count the Gen X references, because I want to continue with that power, that strength of the Gen X here. Okay. Here we go.
It has infected the show officially.
Well, here we go. Here's our summary. Ladies and gentlemen, another tie-in. A celestial named the progenitor. How did you say it earlier, Dan?
The progenitor.
The progenitor is judging humanity over the next 24 hours, and if mankind is deemed unworthy, there will be no tomorrow. Speaking of judging, any word on how there's a big celestial head in the middle of the ocean that no one in the MCU has talked about for the past 3 movies? Whatever. Peter has seen the news reports and checks in with Tony Stark before a very judgmental being who looks like Gwen Stacy appears in his bedroom. Or perhaps this is Kindred disguised as Sarah Stacy. Oh wait, Nick Spencer has already been judged for that and has been banished to Substack. So now we have entered another special issue of Spider-Man, the floating heads of guilt and shame. Peter doesn't think it's a good idea to go tuck shopping with Randy Robertson for his upcoming wedding, but hey, there's a judgmental Gwen Stacy looking at him, so why not? Then Peter checks in with Aunt May, who is being visited by her very own judgmental Uncle Ben, Natch. That brings us to a check-in with J. Jonah Jameson, who's all like, why am I not a main character anymore? Is anyone getting judged for that? But seriously, he and Peter hash out all the times JJ both tried to ruin Spider-Man's life and attempted to murder him, and they're cool, so I'm cool. Peter then goes to wait for Ben Reilly, signaling that indeed that storyline isn't done and he doesn't show up. Finally, Peter teams up with Miles and just lets him know he's proud of him before retreating to bed and still finding that Gwen is staring at him. Next day, Peter is at Oscorp. Gwen's still in tow, and a very Harry-looking Norman shows up, prompting the judging Gwen to look frightened before floating away like Poochie going back to his home planet. So Peter goes after her to justify why he's been teaming with Norman, and then we also get a little more insight into what did Peter do, which is something along the lines of teaming with Norman to get back someone he loved a while back. So wait, Norman is Mephisto now? But Peter wants Gwen to know Norman is different now, trying to be better, and gosh darn it, if he can change and Peter can change, everyone can change. Judgmental Gwen deems Peter worthy and gives him one last gift, an opportunity to be with the actual Gwen. They share a moment that's observed by Norman, who it turns out is being judged by his very own judgmental Gwen. And that is my summary, Dan.
Wow. I just, how many times can you fit the word judge into several paragraphs? I think is what we're going for here, but appropriate given this issue. So Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 10. I think there's no other place to start than to say, wow, what a contrast of quality between two tie-in issues back to back. You know, like, boy, this might be one of the best tie-in issues that I've ever read, sandwiched up against one of the worst tie-in issues I've ever read. And I wonder if you share that sentiment, Mark.
I do. I mean, like, certainly, you know, not to, you know, overpraise the run from a few years back, but like I do remember that, like, that Absolute Carnage tie-in during the Spencer run, which I actually thought was really effective in terms of working in that storyline, but also moving forward the Spider-Man storyline. I think we're in similar territory here. I mean, it kind of cuts both ways. I mean, we don't really move ahead that much what's going on here. I mean, we get that kind of illusion at the end with Norman, which I do think is important. I don't want to, like, gloss over it, but, like, you know, I at the same time, this is still kind of like a bottle episode, you know, as I referred to in the synopsis, a floating heads of guilt and shame issue, but it was an effective one. You know, we haven't really done a Peter and Gwen one in a while. So I enjoyed this. I enjoyed them using the Judgment Day and this whole Inhumans thing to kind of, not Inhumans, Eternals. Sorry, I'm losing track of my super team that Marvel is pushing at the moment. Anyway, yeah, no, agreed with you, Dan. I mean, this was a good tie-in that kind of both stayed very much within the realm of Spider-Man, but also kind of in a very slight, subtle way moved ahead the main storyline. So, you know, kudos for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really solid about this is, like you said, it continues to push the story, but even more so the themes of the run. And, you know, you and Alan had been discussing all these really great character thematics while I was gone, and frankly was really jealous about, because, like, when have we really as a podcast largely been able to move past discussing plot? Because we often so get hung up with the quality of flimsy storytelling that here you guys were really able to talk about, like, character motivations and theme and real artistry into one of these books. And for me, this is like a welcome back. And what I liked about this is that I think all the things that you guys were talking about were really solidified in this issue. Like Peter's depression, if that wasn't something you were picking up on before, here it, like, is front and center. I mean, the guy is, like, not shaving, right? Like, Nick Dragotta's art has him with this 5 o'clock shadow the whole issue. Like, his day is not really spent being necessarily productive more than it is, like, shoring up relationships and checking in with people and going to bed early with this kind of specter of guilt laying over him. He spends half the issue crying, and maybe the reader did too. And so, like, for me, this was, like, all of that stuff really solidified, and including what you guys were saying about, like, what are his real motives with Norman. And here he just says it right out loud, and we'll talk about that in greater detail. But I think it's totally fine to spend an issue making sure that the audience is completely on board with what you're selling. And I know in the last issue I said like it was kind of saying the quiet part out loud, but here I thought like that was okay because the issue is really about like kind of like coming forward with your internal and making it external, specifically in the form of this Gwen. And to note, my final note on this is, I think you couldn't do this issue as issue 900 because it would be compared with Happy Birthday 500 so sharply. But this is more in vein of the things I kind of expect from a Centennial issue. And if this had been expanded into a Centennial, I think people would have found it more natural to the run and have enjoyed it more if it didn't draw such a striking comparison to issue 500. And I'm curious to hear your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to that, frankly, is, the difference between this issue and what we got last issue and then what we got in 900 was I feel like this issue is not remotely out of place with, as you've been saying, the tone and themes of the run. So yeah, I mean, I feel if we got, I don't know if I needed this exact story for 900 per se, but something that's a character meditation on Peter and his current state of mind and his current doldrums. I mean, you can call it depression, you can call it whatever you want, but I mean, it's certainly the lowest of the low that we've seen him at in quite a while. I feel that would have been more appropriate given the tenor of this run so far. So the fact that we kind of got this very tonally dissident issue for 900 and then whatever last issue was, which it's not even so much that it was tonally dissident, it just felt so out of place. We're talking about a story, a tie-in to a story that happened months earlier anyway, and then it just didn't work. Whereas Judgment Day, at the very least, I mean, I believe it's still going on, right? I haven't been reading it. I'm sorry. I want to try and catch up to it, but I'm just there's so many comics, so little time. But yeah, it's at least current in terms of the event, but it's current within the realm of Amazing Spider-Man and the Zeb Wells run right now. The only thing, frankly, that it was missing was John Romita Jr., and we can talk about the art later, but yeah, I mean, I think that I would have loved to have seen JR take a stab at something this character-centric like this with, the way he's been doing the character moments earlier in this run. But yeah, so I totally agree with you there. It was just nice to have a tie-in, but have a tie-in that it just feels seamlessly a part. Years from now, I feel like you can read this story in a collection, and it doesn't matter if you knew what Judgment Day was. The story works, and that to me is the sign of a good tie-in issue.
The closest thing that I can compare this to is the introduction of Cindy Moon in Original Sin. And as much as we've discussed not loving that introduction of the character, Slott did his best with this mandate of revealing some secret from the character's past and integrating it into his story to the point that he kind of used Cindy to kick off Spider-Verse in a way that never felt natural to that, but at least I think there was an attempt. This does a better job, I think, than that. But there is something to these kind of line-wide events that are constructed in a way to allow these characters to have really personal stories. Original Sins was everybody has some secret from their past that had been erased. Here, everybody is being judged individually. So if you're going to structure an event to allow for tie-ins, this is kind of an interesting way to do that. And I think it works especially well with Spider-Man because this idea of judging the character based on his actions and virtues is so inherent, not only within the context of the world of Spider-Man, but also for us as readers reading Spider-Man. We're kind of always judging him by his actions. And so it's kind of curious to see that externalized in the form of Gwen in this way, or like to, as you were saying earlier, to literalize the floating heads of guilt. And we've seen this many different ways over the years, and it makes this not entirely novel, but I thought a successful thing. But one of the things I'm curious about, and I wonder if this came up in your mind when reading it, is this kind of depiction of like performative goodness in this issue. Like so many of the other characters are like kind of like shouting it to the gods, like Santa Claus on the night before Christmas. Like if I can just get in a couple of good, very performative acts of goodness, maybe Santa will bring me an extra gift, you know? Did you see Peter's actions kind of working that way, or how did you feel about Peter's work within goodness?
A little. I mean, like I was like a little. I don't want to say taken aback because that's too strong, but I was a little struck by like the whole thing with Randy. You know, it's like it felt like, you know, like traditional Peter. I mean, you know, sometimes to a fault in the other direction. You know, if he feels like there's a big crisis afoot, like he doesn't have time for the small interactions. You know what I mean? That's kind of his MO. It's, you know, it's his trademark. To blow off the, you know, the go check in on Nathan Lubetsky or go do something for Aunt May. You know, like so it felt a little out of character for me that Peter and, you know, in his general being would be like, no, like I need to spend this time with Randy, you know, like it was nice. And like, you know, we'll get to this shortly about the like, I like that we had these check-ins because I feel like we haven't really had them to much degree so far in this run. But it did feel a little out of place for me. I mean, I think most of the other check-ins were aligned with Peter's general morality, but like the Randy one felt the least organic to me.
Yeah, I think there's like an even stronger version of this issue that does kind of pose a bunch of moral questions for Peter, like the Nathan Lubetsky like thing. You know, like is he going to go and save Crusher Hogan or watch over Nathan Lubetsky? That you could really kind of end the issue thinking, how will Peter actually be judged by this? Like, in the way we always ask, like, what is the choice of the greater good? I think about, like, the Kimia's Castle story, where he, like, saves Sandman's daughter from Sandman, but she then ends up going into a faulty foster system, and you really kind of ask yourself, like, was that the right choice? And, yeah, or just one where we see Peter, like you said, going about the things he would have done anyway, and proving that he just naturally does good. And I feel like this kind of rode the line. The stuff that worked the best for me was him kind of trying to justify his actions with Norman, because that was a decision he had kind of already made, and felt like he had to like clarify on whether it's just for us, the audience, or the all-knowing progenitor. So yeah. So what of the check-ins stood out to you? I mean, I thought some of these were like equally touching or humorous. Did any of them stand out to you?
I mean, there was an element of some of them being rather perfunctory. I mean, like you know, it was nice to see him and Miles interact, but like it was definitely like, you know, in the list of who we gonna have Peter team up with here. I was like, oh, okay, Miles. I guess you know, in this new paradigm, you know, it's important to show Peter and Miles together. I mean, you know, they are trying to sell a sequel to the only Oscar-winning Marvel movie. Yeah.
It's like, it's one of those things. It's like, oh yes, it's nice to see that they coexist, because for so long that's been ignored.
Right.
But I actually would have loved to have seen this issue with Peter out of costume the entire time.
Right.
But anyway, continue. Any other thoughts?
But I mean, you know, the Aunt May one, I mean, it was useful in showing like her with Ben. Although, like, would Ben be judging May? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I guess, I mean, obviously he is the most pivotal person in her life, but you know, like, it made sense for Gwen because of, you know, what's going on in Peter's life. So that was kind of like, oh, okay. and I did enjoy Jonah. I mean, like, just because I also have frankly missed Jonah in this run. Like, I feel like we've gotten very little of him. But yeah, I mean, these were I was more happy for the check-ins themselves than the quality of the check-ins, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love the Jonah one, and I hope that he becomes a bigger figure in this story, because I think Zeb Wells' voice for him really worked. Like,
Right.
I thought it was very funny to see Jonah on the defensive, because he's kind of been operating as an ally of Spider-Man in recent. And so to see him kind of like having to justify his previous actions was funny. The line that really made me laugh was him saying, like, I've underpaid you for years, Robbie. Really
Right.
made me chuckle, just because it's just like his closest friend. He was kind of dicking over the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Aunt May thing worked for me. But if you think about it, it's like, okay, like, would it be Uncle Ben? But, you know, I guess the person you're closest to is the one that maybe judges you the most.
Right.
You know, but yeah, I thought the rooftop scene for Ben was beautiful in terms of like art. Like, that was the one that worked for me the most, the kind of vacant rooftop and the sunset. And, you know, I know that you wrote it up as like a perfunctory check-in, but like comparing this to the death of Harry Osborn in the Beyond run, like at least remembering that this is something that weighs on Peter,
Right.
I
Right.
appreciate it, especially
Absolutely.
since we're going to get a check-in on that in a couple weeks' time. So, but let's talk about the core of this story, which I think really is Peter having to justify to Gwen he's working with Norman.
Yeah.
Tell me your thoughts about this.
Well, I mean, this has kind of been the crux of this run period over the last few issues. And, you know, frankly, if you do want to languish on the Twitter world, like where you see, like, I think a lot of the teeth gnashing from the Spider World, that and anything having to do with MJ and Peter being together. And, you know, like, do we need an issue that just to justify this alliance? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we do at this point, because it's like, you know, we've seen this, you know, what, 3 or 4 issues in a row now where Peter and, you know, Norman are doing their thing here. And like, you know, it's, I've talked about in previous episodes, like, this is frankly where the whole mystery box thing is kind of, I think, troublesome, not because I want to know what the mystery is, but because, like, you know, we're holding cards and we can't explain this very unusual alliance, and, you know, we have to assume that it's in character in some way, but like the longer we go without telling us more to that point, the harder that gets to justify. And, you know, like, I do feel like this issue was effective in kind of drawing a line and saying, like, no, like, Norman did something that Peter really needed that no one else would do. So from that end, like, Peter has to give Norman the benefit of the doubt. And, like, you could just say, well, of course he did. That's why else would Peter be doing it? But, like, I do think it needed to be said. So I was in favor of it for that. But it's like, you know, there's also a part of me that's like, you know, we're in this predicament right now because we're choosing to tell this story that's going both forwards and backwards at the same time, which makes it challenging to, like, truly thread the needle and justify a character's actions. But this, at least, I think got us a little closer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two separate things to talk about here. One is that, like, there's this, I thought the thing that was, like, emotionally affecting in the moment, even without knowledge of what did Peter do, is that he sees it as his responsibility to keep Norman from becoming Green Goblin again, right? And he says it's out of a love for Gwen. And to me, that's completely in character, that he would align himself with this guy and take up a responsibility of preventing him from ever going down that path again because of the memory of Gwen in his mind. And like, if that was the only reason, personally, I would be 100% on board. Like, that makes sense to me as something that Peter would do, would take this upon himself. Just as I think he did, back in the 60s and 70s, where he was making sure that Norman wouldn't relapse into his goblin persona and didn't completely throw the guy under the bus, right? Like, he could have taken him to the cops at any moment, or a mental institution, and maybe he should have, right? Like, maybe that would have been the more responsible thing, but at the time, he's a young kid and didn't really know what he was getting to, and here I feel like he can have a stronger grasp given the still murkiness of whatever the Sin Eater did. So, like, on that alone, I feel like I would buy into this relationship. Do you think that would work for you, or do you need that little bit more of whatever Peter and Norman did together?
I think for now it's fine. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
But like, let's see how much further we push things without giving us more. I guess that's what it boils down to. You know what I mean? Like, if they start having like bro hugs and stuff, and we're still at kind of this point in the narrative, it's. I mean, it's been an uneasy alliance from the get-go, but like, the fact that there's an alliance at all was questionable, and I feel like this issue at least kind of pushed us closer to that being acceptable. So, it just kind of, it's, the sliding scale, like keep everything aligned here and we'll be okay. But like, if we start like really pushing like the like I said, the friendship, or, something deeper than just, Peter doing something because he feels this is the right thing to do. I also feel like, like, I don't know, this is a sequential art medium, and like sometimes things are just not going to make sense until they're fully fleshed out, like, so like but that's me kind of just arguing with like, random anonymous Twitter people who keep fighting about this stuff, you know what I mean? So
well, that's the thing, is like, and I don't want this podcast to become a response to Spider-Man Twitter. Right. Although it's kind of partially the reason you and I started the show, which is to say, like, not everybody has a really unhealthy relationship with the character. Right. At least I could like to characterize our relationship with him as
I
not
would agree,
unhealthy.
Yeah.
Despite spending as much time as we do on it. But like, if you were just to go on Twitter, you wouldn't understand that it was an uneasy alliance between him and Norman. Right? Like, you would think he and Norman were holding hands and skipping down the yellow brick road together and about to get like a perm or whatever in Oz. But which maybe Norman could use, given that. Yeah, that's it. But we were both headed the same direction there. But like, for me, like, this rationale makes sense why Peter would strike up an uneasy alliance. Now, the second part is that there is something we did not see where, Peter was out of options because someone close to him, a female close to him, died. And I think it's, obviously, we're supposed to think it's MJ. And I would assume it's MJ when the curtain does eventually get pulled back. We're going into Wizard of Oz territory here. You think I'm watching this movie all the time. But I would assume it's MJ, although they're being cagey about it, so it's not safe to assume anything. And there's some other pieces we could put together, like the Human Torch in issue 1, I believe, suggested that Peter stole something from the Fantastic Four. So the pieces are coming together. Like, we had this mysterious Will-O-the-Wisp figure that appeared outside of MJ and Peter's, room. Ultimately, this leads to, I assume, MJ dying and Peter and Norman using something from the FF, like maybe the Forever Gate, to bring MJ back, or like a version of MJ back, right? Because now Peter suggested didn't go the way they wanted, but it ended up saving her. And so who's in a situation that's less than ideal for Peter? It's MJ, because she's with Paul and these kids and whatever the mystery is there. So like, for me at least, this was a huge clue to unlocking whatever this is. And there's a lot of interesting things that result from that. Like in the previous issue, Peter didn't really seem to understand the situation that MJ is in, right? He thinks that she's in love with Paul, and she does not like quantify that other than
Right.
saying she's in it because of a responsibility. So there's a lot of wrinkles that are left to be solved, but the stakes are clear, right? Like whatever happened, Peter lost a loved one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Aunt May again, which would be weird for them to double down on that. But
I mean, like when was the last time we had a May story that she almost died? I mean, this is important stuff.
Did you read this? Did you read this and like think he was referring to One More Day? The first time you read it through it?
No. I mean, I know I made that joke in the synopsis, but I mean, no. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I assumed it was something with MJ, frankly.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm still eager to see what it is, but I feel like at least I know the stakes now, like for what Peter did. I wonder if like this was ultimately arrived at as the way to tell the story, if it truly is about killing MJ, and they did like a wins loss category, which is if we start a new run and kill MJ, how angry are people going to be, versus if we have him not with MJ and later reveal that he did it to bring her back from the dead. Like I could see them weighing that choice. But anyway, I did want to, before we put a close on this topic, Gwen has to make a choice, this celestial version of Gwen, whether he's worthy or not worthy. I'm curious if you had any opinion on that, whether you thought it was going to end up one way or the other. And I'm curious about like how you feel about the ultimate reason that he was deemed worthy, and your reaction to that.
I mean, honestly, I mean, I'm a Spider-Man guy, so I was like to me, like, of course Peter was going to be worthy. I mean, like his motivations always seem to be true in some way. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't, like that's who he is as a character. So I wasn't expecting, I felt like we got the psych out a little bit when Gwen, when Norman shows up and Gwen kind of like takes off. But I mean, I thought it was very nicely done. I mean, like, the way she spoke to him and kind of, it was, as Alan and I have been alluding to, I mean, this is a very dark period for Peter, but not dark like Frank Miller Batman dark, but just like this is some rough, heady stuff for a Peter Parker story that we've been dealing with the last few months. So to kind of have the celestial Gwen basically say to him, like, no, your heart is full, you're all right, you're gonna, it's kind of like, I don't know, I felt it was a little bit of reassurance to the readers who are following along and like, oh man, how far is Peter from his path right now? And it's, this was kind of the reassurance, like, no, he's still who he is, he's still Peter. We're being maybe even a little on the nose about it, but like I think we kind of needed that right now given where things are at. So I thought this was well executed.
And I'll conclude this segment by saying her response was my favorite part of the issue, where she described, as you said, his heart is full, but she continues by saying the heart was also open and alive. I see it shine so brightly it blinds you and baffles the mind of man. And like, I think it's a really great description of Peter when he's written, I think, well, which is to say, he's full-hearted, but he's also open and alive, meaning it's open to change. He's open to taking new things into his heart, and engaging with the world around him. But then the second half is really interesting too. It shines so brightly it blinds you, which is to say, like, his heart is so good that it gets him into trouble. And I feel personally like I felt touched by that, because I often feel that way in my life, that I kind of approach most people with a full heart and let them kind of like, I feel like I've been used before in the past because of my open heart. and my lack of cynicism about people. But I really don't know any other way to approach the world because I like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's where we find Peter with Norman here. And I think we all probably assume it's going to come back and bite him ultimately in the end. But that's how he operates. And the last part is that it baffles the mind of man. I think you're seeing Twitter react to this, which is like, why would Peter do this? Why would he act this way? And my response to that is because it's Peter Parker. Like, he's a good person. Of
Right.
course he would act this way, and you might be upset about it, but that's why he's a hero, right? Like, he is willing to get hurt so long as he stands on principles. And that's what I love about this run is I think it understands that about Peter Parker. Do you have any thoughts about that to close out this segment?
No, I just said you're spot on. I I don't know if I have anything to elaborate on, but yeah, I mean, like that is who Peter is, you know, like he it's never easy. It's never black and white. It's very complex. There's shades of gray, and you know, that is what we got here. So, you know,
Awesome.
well done, Zeb Wells.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think like writing like that is really hard and being that specific. And I just thought it was really beautiful. And I really have been appreciating that about this run.
Yep.
Well, anyway, Mark, why don't you tell some of our listeners where they can engage in conversations like this amongst themselves and, you know, including us in our Slack.
Yeah, well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Mark, one of my favorite things about the Slack is we just added a new channel this past week or so. It's called the Comic Swap channel. You know, this was actually recommended to me by our community that I add this because we had a collecting channel before, but not one dedicated specifically to like helping people find holes in their collection or you know, trade comics between each other. And already it's become very active. Now, this is not related to the Comic Swap channel, but one of our Slackers, Spider Mike, he got a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15 this week and you know, documented the whole process in our collecting channel. But you never know, like the Comic Swap, we've already had people exchanging like, hey, I'm missing these things, and other people saying, I was looking to get rid of these. So like if you're looking to upgrade copies of, you know, comics you have, like you never know who is got what, especially among such a like concentrated community of like 400 Spider-Man fans. So if that sounds like fun to you and you're someone that's looking to kind of play around with your collection, come join our Slack and hop into the Comic Swap channel. It's an awesome place to chat with other Spider-Man nerds and just positive people that aren't reflective of what Mark and I talk about the Twitter community being. So you can find a link to the Slack in our every episode description or just by going to amazingspidertalk.com and seeing a link there. And come on in and say hi. Don't be one of these people that ghosts their way into the Slack and never says hello. So, you know, Mark is taking up presence in the Slack, and we're happy to have him there too. So the Slack, it's just a good time all around.
Definitely. And like, you know, look, I got this like first appearance of like the Red Goblin. If you want to swap it for Amazing Fantasy 15, let's make it happen, guys. Okay. So
fair trade. I've got a few of those, Mark. I got a few of those. So
all right,
if you're sitting on extra AF-15s, like, you know, the Comic Swap channel, in fact, don't even go to the Comic Swap channel. Just privately direct message me in the Slack, and that'll be fine too. Like, that's about as good as the Comic Swap channel.
All right, let's go back to our issue here. You want to talk a little bit about the art in this one, Dan?
Yeah, I think the art in this, you know, this is Nick Dragotta and Marcio Menyz. And look, Marcio Menyz, a champ. This dude is holding this run together. Like, if there's any kind of consistency across the art board, you know, obviously we love Joe Caramagna, but Marcio Menyz's colors have fleshed out everything he touches. But it's really hard to look at Nick Dragotta's pencils and not desperately wish John Romita Jr. drew this issue. And that's not to say the pencils are bad. Like, I don't love them in a lot of instances. Like, there is some ugly Norman Osborn here that I think actually damages the storytelling, and we'll talk about that later, I think, in more detail. But this is like an issue that JR I think was born to draw, and you just wish they could have waited a few more weeks and made that possible. Mark, do you have any feelings about the art here?
I mean, I alluded to it in earlier in the show. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I mean, like I would have loved to have seen Romita kind of take his hand at something like this. I mean, I guess for the most part, what Dragotta did was fine, but like I don't know, there was nothing really from a visual standpoint memorable going on here, and if anything, like you alluded to, maybe some things that were a little questionable from a visual standpoint. I mean, it wasn't like anything was unsightly, but it just it didn't really work for me, and there wasn't much like we had some really big emotional moments here that I just don't feel he was able to really capture. I mean, at the same token, like in a medium like this, like as good as Wells's writing could be, like without the art, could it really bring it home? And it makes you think, like, well, maybe not, but I don't know. It's one of those scenarios where we've seen really great art and kind of those subtle, quieter character moments done well in this run. So like the fact that we just didn't get the same quality here is a little bit of a disappointment for me.
Yeah, and I've seen Dragotta just do better stuff in general, in his career with Marvel and elsewhere. And I think the thing about it is, I think this issue works when it's forced to be subtle. Mm-hmm. Like the stuff with like stone-faced Gwen. I found all of her stuff really effective. The kind of like images of her with the celestial Kirby crackle coming out of her head. Like right. Those were some interesting images. The quiet moment on the rooftop waiting for Ben to show up, and the little spider bot like reluctantly crawling up onto Peter's back. And I thought the moments where it needed to be over the top worked too, because I found so much of the work here not subtle, but I liked his, Jameson, just because Jameson is so big, it matched. But when you've got Peter's eyes the size of dinner saucers. Yeah, right, exactly. I someone like JR would have handled the Gwen return really subtly. And here it was taking like a big moment and doing it even bigger than I think it needed to be. I even think back to Stuart Immonen's, return. I believe it was Stuart Immonen, like the return of Gwen in Clone Conspiracy. And just maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was Bagley. I just remember that.
No,
scene.
it was Ron Friends who did the Gwen stuff. Remember?
He did the backup Gwen
flashback.
stuff.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. But either way, like I just thought like this had a real moment to be an emotionally powerful moment, and it just didn't. I know some people cried reading this, and it just didn't get me to that level because I thought the art kind of overdid it. It didn't need to go so big. Like Peter, like having Japanese anime levels of tears pouring out of his eyes. It rendered my reaction to it a little mute. So speaking of which, the return of Gwen Stacy, I thought a beautiful moment, but I have to admit, like, I was kind of waiting for her to say something a little more profound, given that we had this moment just like 5 years ago. Maybe it was longer ago than that.
Right.
Where I thought like we kind of had a similar conversation. And I have to admit, I'm growing a little bit exhausted of Gwen only ever being used or being really rendered as a caricature of guilt weighing on Peter or absolving Peter's guilt and nothing in between. That's it. She just exists as this cosmic judge, which she literally is in this issue. So it works. but it is exhausting in its entirety that she only ever appears in the clothes she died in, and she's
Right.
only useful as a object of guilt. How did this scene work for you?
I mean, are you saying that, anyone who uses her this way should be thrown in jail, Dan, or is that just no? Sorry,
Mark, do you want to explain?
No, I just a Twitter reference, people. That's all. I don't think it needs further context. Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree 100% in the fact that like, it was unexpected when we got this moment. Like I like legitimately, I was like, oh wow, we're going there, and then they did it, and I was like, oh, okay. Like I don't know how necessary it really ended up being given what they did with it. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like we're it is the year 2022. We have Spider-Woman Gwen Stacy in this universe. I don't know if we really need to be doing this with Gwen anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like, yeah, like, we get it. I don't know. I'm with you. I just don't know what else what terrain we can do here where, outside of like you said, it's about Peter's guilt. It's about Peter's shame, Peter's failure. Those are the core elements of what Gwen Stacy is. Except for the fact that like, we've been able to introduce new elements of Gwen in other, in terms of from other universes or whatever that maybe can kind of move past this, and yet we still kind of seem stuck in this in like the 616 storytelling. So I'm kind of over it. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it just doesn't have the effect of like the happy birthday from issue 500, the return of Uncle Ben for a moment. Mainly because, well, it's weird because Uncle Ben is not as fully fleshed out of a character as Gwen, but maybe that lends that kind of storytelling to be more okay, given that Uncle Ben never really got much characterization, or the characterization he has gotten over the years, as you and I used to joke at the end of our show, is so scattershot that Uncle Ben is the everybody.
Right.
Or he is the every spectacular white man that ever existed. But he's the father everyone wishes they had in every conceivable instance. So maybe that shallow characterization does allow for this, but like I know that Gwen had more to her than just being this figure. And I also don't think the comic needed to go as far as bringing her back to life, in that it already had this literalization of the theme of the guilt of Gwen, that to then like bring her back and have it be this confused, like, Peter, you're older. It was in a weird way creepy to watch her die again, in essence,
Right,
or
right.
return to the afterlife. It's just kind of like has weird ramifications. Like her soul was plucked from
Yeah.
the netherworld. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much, and I'm definitely thinking about it too much. But alas, this is how my brain works.
Speaking of overthinking, do we want to talk a little bit about Norman here? Because, I mean, we obviously talked earlier about the Peter Norman dynamics, but what about Norman himself here? I mean, like, it's funny. Like, I know you have some strong opinions about how he's rendered here. I mean, my takeaway was like, wow, he really looks like Harry. Like every time I saw him here, I was like, did like they get like the wrong? I mean, I know that Norman and Harry obviously look similar, but like this kind of took it like he looked younger. You know what I mean? Like that was it. Like he didn't look like old Norman here. So I don't know. But what was your takeaway with how Norman was depicted here?
Well, I just like nothing about how Dragotta rendered Norman in this comic. Like, I think if there's a weakness in his pencils, it always showed up on Norman. Like,
Yeah.
there's an image of Norman on the last page, which like is like chicken scratch, twisted, weird. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even know how else to describe it. Like, I if I was the editor, I'd be like, hey, give this one another shot.
Yeah.
The only positive I can say about his Norman is that his Tootsie Roll rows were in the right direction, as
Right.
opposed to JRJR's, which are now like somehow turned. If you really want to apply logic to the Norman
There you go.
hair. But I actually think the depiction of how Dragotta rendered Norman is actually problematic storyline wise, because we are in this kind of nether realm where the story wants us to ask the questions of, is Norman faking this and he's actually evil and he's putting on a face to twist Peter a little bit, or is he good? And I think based on my read of the cell phone crush scene from a few issues back is that Norman is good, but he's keeping demons at bay. And he takes it out on that phone because, it's like a stress ball. Like he it's there and it's threatening to come up. And that's what Peter is watching for. And I think that's the richer story, right? Like we've all seen Norman lie to Peter. I'm fine, blah, blah, blah. Like we can be buddies, even in the movie, right? Like we have right before his death, Willem Dafoe's Norman's like, Peter, you can trust me, and Godspeed, Spider-Man, that whole twist. We've seen that a million times. This potential is so much richer, but to see the way he drew him here, he just looked evil the whole time. Yeah. And whether Dragotta was not given the notes that this is a different Norman, as JRJR has been rendering him, full of empathy and things like that. And then combining that with a red-eyed, evil-looking Gwen judging him at the end.
Right.
It just made me think the opposite, which is that Norman is actually evil, based on his reaction to seeing a living Gwen and being judged by Gwen. And I just really hope that's not the case. And I have to kind of think that this is just like a poor art rendering of Norman. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're well, I agree that the art could have led us in that direction. I'm with you in that I feel that Norman is trying here. I think the whole run rests on the idea is Norman trying, and I think the answer is yes. So this was not great from an art, but it's probably one of the few things that really didn't work here in this story, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so we're at the end of the issue. So, Mark, let's give it a grade. You want to give it a grade?
Yeah, I mean, this is a solid B+ to me. I don't know if it has enough to move it into the A range, but I really enjoyed this. This was a good comic, and like I said, I feel like this is something years from now we can, it'll be one of those kind of check-in Peter-centric stories that we'll go back to and be like, okay, yeah, that was good. That was a good read.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this is a B+ book that could have very easily been an A book, I think, with better art. But especially in terms of tie-ins, I would say this is S-class tie-in. I can't think of really too many top tier tie-ins like this. The last one I think I really enjoyed close to this level is the Civil War II tie-in with Robot Master.
Right.
But I think this is better than that even. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that the comparison is so wildly different to the last issue that this was I went into this apprehensive and came out of it very glad we did it. What a great opportunity for a story here.
Right. Well, now we have to get through Dark Web, but
but before that, Mark, we've got a Hobgoblin story, which every day that goes by, I'm tortured that I'm not reading this Hobgoblin story right now.
Well, we're almost there. So, but if people want to, I don't know, hear more about Hobgoblin, no, this is a terrible transition. Dan, tell us about the Patreon.
Yeah, of course. If you do find Mark and my show entertaining and valuable, we would love it if you would support us. That takes the form of recommending the show to a friend. And if you're able, become a member on our Patreon.
Yeah, we can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. We are constantly making exclusive content for our members.
Yeah, and that has grown. I've been doing these Twitter Space conversations that have been really awesome with all of our listeners, and I think have really added a lot of value to the Patreon. But I want to kind of double down and say, look, it's $3.99 a month. That's the price of a new comic. like once per month, right? If there's a comic that you enjoy less than listening to our show, like I'm not asking you to consider dropping it, but like consider this a part of your, life. Like you enjoyed this show and part of the habit of listening to Mark and I, it means a lot. And when Mark says something like we owe the show's success to you and we can only bring you this content with your support, it's true. Like I'm a new father of a newborn child. Mark has had a child for a long time, so he suffered through this growth when we first started the show. But I've been able to offload so much of the work that I used to do to members of a growing team. We now have a video editor, Alex Galucki, who we hired this week, who's going to be able to do awesome things with our YouTube and video content that I used to try to do. And again, that could only happen with Patreon because I'm able to pay him. And so I just wanted to reiterate, like, hey, if you haven't checked out the Patreon, go check it out because it would mean a lot to us, especially in the state that we're in, and Mark and I trying to expand things while also expanding our lives. I think it's really valuable. So Mark, if they want to go beyond $3.99, what are some of the other pluses they can get for being a part of our Patreon?
Yeah, well, Dan, if they contribute $10 a month, they can gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background, which is created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons.
And on that note, I will say Nick Cagnetti's Pink Lemonade #1 from Oni Press came out this week in comic shops everywhere. If you didn't pick up a copy, go see if you can find Pink Lemonade #1. It's my pick of the week. I love Pink Lemonade and I love Nick's art. And he also wrote this, and it's a really uplifting, heartwarming comic that I think everyone's going to love. And in terms of the commissions, Mark, I sent it to you this morning. After 4.5 years, I had a child. We went through a pandemic. You got 2 dogs. I got, I think it was right after I got married. Barry Kitson has delivered the Death of Gwen Stacy commission for us, and it is awesome and heartbreaking and all of that. I wouldn't say worth the wait. No, it was, it's worth the wait because we had other commissions in the meantime, but it's finally here. So if you wanted that Barry Kitson commission, it's going to be coming out to our higher level patrons real soon. So again, we don't want anybody to contribute if you're financially strapped, but if you have like enough to spare the change for another comic book equivalent, come join our Patreon. It would mean a lot to Mark and I and help us to keep the show going. And if you can just share the show and that's your way of contributing, that would be huge too. But lastly, a thank you to everybody who already makes the show possible and makes our show continue to grow in the way that it has. So again, I wanted to say an extra special thanks this week because I was really thinking about our Patreon contributors and what they allow me to do and what they allow us to do in this time in our lives. So thank you again to everybody who is contributing to the show.
Awesome. Well, Dan, unfortunately, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, our episode was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our video version is available on YouTube and is edited by Alex Galucki. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider Madge. And our animated intro is created and performed by Josh Sutton from the Panels to Pixels YouTube channel. Mark, all the contributors to our show is now growing larger than an anniversary issue of Amazing Spider-Man. We're slowly getting there. So again, and that's thanks to our patronage from our Patreon supporters. But Mark, until the ghost of Flash Thompson returns to judge the value of this show in his absence, what's our motto?
Of course. Hey, puny Parker. The motto is, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.
talk.